Rain poured down in heavy sheets, striking the cracked windshield of an old sedan parked at the edge of a nearly empty gas station. Inside, a man sat motionless, his forehead resting against the steering wheel. His hands, roughened by years of odd jobs and hard labor, gripped the wheel as though letting go might mean losing the last shred of strength he carried. In the back seat, curled beneath a worn blanket too thin for the cold October night, his young son slept soundly, unaware of just how fragile their world had become. This was Daniel's life now. A single father clinging to survival in a world that seemed determined to break him. Once, not too long ago, he had a home filled with laughter, a wife whose smile could brighten the darkest day, and a future that seemed secure. But life, cruel and unforgiving, had stripped it all away. His wife's illness had drained their savings, and when she passed, it felt as though the light of his life had been extinguished. He was left with grief, a mountain of bills, and the unbearable responsibility of raising his son alone. The heater in the car coughed weakly, struggling against the icy air. Daniel glanced at the gas gauge, nearly empty. He had enough for maybe a few more miles before the car, their only shelter, would become nothing more than a freezing metal box. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but the single sandwich he had bought earlier was saved for his boy. Father's sacrifice first. That was an unspoken rule Daniel had come to live by. Outside, the storm raged on. The fluorescent lights above the gas station flickered, casting long shadows across the parking lot. And then, in that restless night, Daniel noticed her. A woman stood under the weak glow of the gas station light, drenched to the bone, her coat soaked and clinging to her frame. She held a small leather bag tightly against her chest, as if it were the last thing she owned. Her hair plastered against her face, framed eyes that darted around the lot, wary, searching, lost. She looked like someone on the verge of breaking. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He knew that look. The look of someone carrying too much pain with nowhere left to go. For a moment he wrestled with hesitation. He already had so little, barely enough warmth for himself and his son. Letting a stranger in could mean risk. But then, his gaze shifted to the sleeping boy in the back seat, and he thought of the kind of man he wanted his son to remember. Not bitter, not hardened, but kind. He rolled down the window slightly, rain blowing in against his arm. "Hey," he called softly, careful not to wake his child. You okay out there?" The woman turned, startled. For a heartbeat, suspicion flashed across her face, but the exhaustion in her body seemed to win. She shook her head, water dripping from her hair, and whispered, I just need somewhere warm for a while." Daniel studied her. Something in her voice carried both strength and fragility, like someone used to holding herself together for too long. Against all logic, his heart overruled his doubts. He unlocked the passenger door. "Come in. It's not much, but it's warmer than out there." She hesitated only a moment before slipping inside. The air grew thick with the scent of rain and damp clothing. She sat quietly, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to shrink into the smallest possible space. For a while, neither spoke. The car filled only with the sound of rain hammering the roof and the soft breathing of Daniel's son in the back. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "Name's Daniel," he said. She glanced at him, her eyes still guarded, then replied, "Clara." The name lingered in the air, soft, yet weighted. Daniel nodded, though she offered no more. He didn't press. He knew what it was like to guard your story, to keep it locked away until you found someone worthy of hearing it. Minutes passed. The storm outside showed no signs of relenting. Daniel's gaze drifted again to his son, sleeping peacefully. Clara followed his eyes. "Your boy?" she asked. "Yeah," Daniel said, his voice catching with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "He's everything." Something shifted in her expression then. The steel mask she wore cracked just slightly, revealing a flicker of tenderness. She turned toward the window, hiding it quickly, but Daniel had seen it. As the night stretched on, Clara shivered, her wet clothes clinging to her. Without a second thought, Daniel pulled off his own jacket, thin, worn, but still dry, and draped it over her shoulders. She stiffened, surprised. "You don't have to—" "Keep it," Daniel interrupted gently. "I'll manage." She looked at him, searching his face as though trying to understand why a man with so little would give away even that. And in her silence, Daniel saw something he hadn't expected: gratitude, but also recognition. almost as if she understood sacrifice too well. The rain outside softened to a drizzle. The gas station lights hummed, and for the first time that night, Daniel felt something more than despair. Sitting there in the dim glow with a stranger beside him and his son safe behind him, he felt a spark of connection, fragile, fleeting, but real. And what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that this single act of kindness, letting a stranger into his car, would be the very decision that rewrote the course of his life, because Clara was not who she appeared to be. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world outside washed but gray. Thin streaks of pale sunlight tried to break through heavy clouds as Daniel stirred awake. His back ached from the awkward position of sleeping in the driver's seat, but the soft sound of breathing reminded him of why he endured. He turned to check the back seat. His son still slept, cocooned in the thin blanket, lips parted in peaceful slumber. Beside him, Clara sat upright, her arms folded tightly around the leather bag she carried. She hadn't slept much, if at all. The faint shadows under her eyes told of long nights before this one. She noticed Daniel's gaze and offered a polite, almost embarrassed smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of voice that carried weight even when whispering. Daniel shrugged, brushing off the gratitude. No one should be out there in weather like that. Her fingers traced the edges of the bag as though it held more than just belongings, perhaps memories, perhaps secrets. She nodded but didn't elaborate. For a few minutes they sat in silence again, the air heavy with things unsaid. Finally Clara spoke. "Your son? He looks happy, even with everything." Daniel's lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "Kids, they're stronger than we think." I try to keep the weight off his little shoulders. "He doesn't need to know the whole truth yet. That we're, well, between homes." Clara studied him, her eyes softening. "You're doing more than most would. Some people run when life gets too hard. You're still here. That counts." Daniel chuckled humorlessly. "Sometimes it feels like I'm barely here. Jobs are hard to come by. Nobody wants to take a chance on a man with gaps in his resume and a child to care for. Still," Clara said, "you didn't run. That's what he'll remember one day." Her words lingered in the air like a balm, settling into the cracks of Daniel's weary heart. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. The boy stirred in the back seat then, rubbing his eyes. "Daddy?" he mumbled. Daniel turned quickly, his face lighting with gentle warmth. "I'm here, buddy." The child blinked at Clara, surprised by the presence of another adult in their little world. She smiled, lifting her hand in a small wave. "Good morning," she said softly. The boy tucked himself under the blanket, shy but curious. "Who's that?" he whispered to his father. "A friend," Daniel replied simply, though the word carried a weight he hadn't expected. Friend. After so long of being alone, the word felt strange, almost foreign, on his tongue. They shared a modest breakfast, a granola bar Daniel had saved for his son, split into pieces so everyone had something. Clara hesitated before accepting her share, but Daniel insisted. "No child of mine eats while someone beside us goes hungry," he said firmly. She bowed her head in quiet acceptance, her eyes glistening. Later that day, Daniel drove Clara into town. He didn't ask where she wanted to be dropped off. Instead, he let her guide him with short, vague instructions. "Here is fine," she finally said, pointing to a quiet street lined with older brick buildings. She lingered at the car door, reluctant. "Thank you, Daniel, for last night. I won't forget it." He nodded, unsure what else to say. She gave a small smile, closed the door gently, and disappeared down the street. As Daniel drove away, a peculiar emptiness filled the car. It was odd. They had shared only one night, a handful of words, and yet her absence left a hollow echo. That evening, Daniel tried to focus on finding work. He scanned bulletin boards, asked around at shops, even stood outside warehouses in the biting wind, hoping for day labor. But rejection followed him like a shadow. Employers saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the desperation in his voice, and they looked away. When he returned to the car, his son asleep again in the back seat, Daniel sat in silence, staring through the cracked windshield. His hands trembled slightly on the wheel. He wondered how much longer he could keep holding everything together. And then, as though the universe itself was listening, A knock startled him. He turned. Clara stood outside once more, rain clinging to her coat, but this time her expression was different, more resolved, more purposeful. Daniel rolled down the window, confusion flickering across his face. "Clara, I thought you'd—" He trailed off. "I couldn't leave it at that," she said firmly. "Not after what you did for me. You gave me kindness when you had nothing to spare." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "Would you let me return the favor?" Daniel blinked, taken aback. His first instinct was to refuse. He wasn't a charity case, but the earnestness in her eyes disarmed him. She wasn't pitying him, she was offering something more. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Clara glanced at the sleeping boy, then back at Daniel. "Meet me tomorrow. There's someone I want you to talk to, about work." That night, Daniel lay awake in the car, staring at the ceiling. He didn't know what to make of her offer. Why would a stranger care? Why would she, of all people, go out of her way for someone like him? But somewhere deep inside, a fragile seed of hope stirred. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel allowed himself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, things could change. What he didn't yet realize was that Clara's story was far from ordinary. And her secret, once revealed, would not just change his life, but redefine everything he thought he knew about fate, kindness, and second chances. The morning sun broke timidly through the clouds, casting a pale glow over the city. Daniel rubbed his eyes, weary but awake, as his son stirred in the back seat. The knock from the previous night replayed in his mind. Clara standing there in the rain, her words echoing, "Meet me tomorrow." He wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe it was just another promise that would vanish like so many others had. People often meant well, but kindness rarely lasted. Still, there was something about Clara's voice, her steady eyes, that made him want to believe. Daniel arrived at the small cafe she had told him about. It wasn't a place he would normally step into. Clean windows, polished wood, the faint hum of jazz spilling softly from hidden speakers. He felt out of place, his worn jacket and tired face standing out among the casual laughter of well-dressed patrons. And then he saw her. Clara sat by the window, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. For the first time, he noticed the way she carried herself. Straight-backed, poised, yet softened by an exhaustion that mirrored his own. She wasn't just surviving. She was someone used to leading, used to controlling her world, yet somehow weighed down. "Daniel," she greeted, her lips curling into a small smile. "I'm glad you came." He slid into the seat across from her, uneasy. "Didn't really know what else to do," he admitted. "Your offer sounded different." Clara studied him for a moment before replying. "You gave me your last bit of warmth without hesitation. That isn't something people forget." He lowered his gaze, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone would." "No," she said softly, "not anyone. Most people turn away when they see someone broken." The words sank into him. He wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He had lived it too many times, people looking past him, refusing to see his struggle. They sat in silence for a beat before Clara leaned forward. "Tell me about your boy. What's his name?" "Ethan," Daniel replied, and his entire face softened at the sound of it. "He's 7. Smart, kind. Too kind, maybe. He worries about me more than he should." Clara's eyes glistened. "Children see more than we think." "Mine does, too." Daniel's head tilted slightly. "You have a child?" She nodded, her expression clouding. "A daughter. She's 12. Brave, stubborn. She has my fire, and sometimes I wonder if that will save her or break her. Being her mother is the hardest and best thing I've ever done." Something in Daniel shifted at her admission. For the first time, he saw not just a stranger but a mirror, a parent fighting invisible battles. "Where is she now?" he asked gently. Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening around her cup. "With family friends, I keep her away from nights like last night. She doesn't need to see me at my weakest." Daniel nodded slowly. "I get that. I've spent years trying to hide the cracks from Ethan, pretending I'm stronger than I am. But sometimes I wonder if hiding the truth just makes them carry more on their own." Their eyes met, and in that moment 2 weary souls connected over the shared weight of parenthood. Clara leaned back, studying him with an intensity that made Daniel fidget. Finally she spoke. "You said yesterday that nobody wants to take a chance on you. What kind of work are you looking for?" "Anything," Daniel replied quickly. Construction, delivery, warehouse shifts. I'll do whatever puts food on the table. Her lips pressed into a thin line, thoughtful. What about management? Supervising? Something where you lead people, not just follow orders? Daniel laughed bitterly. No one's offering that to a man living out of his car. Clara didn't flinch. Maybe they should. As the conversation drifted, Clara offered to cover his meal. He resisted, pride prickling, but she insisted with a firmness that brooked no argument. It wasn't pity. Her eyes made that clear. It was investment. When they stepped outside, the air was crisp but calmer than the days before. Ethan clutched his father's hand, shy around Clara but drawn to her warmth. She crouched down, smiling at him. Hi, Ethan. Your dad told me you like drawing. Ethan nodded timidly. Clara pulled a small sketchbook from her bag. This was my daughter's. She's filled it halfway, but maybe you could finish the rest? The boy's eyes lit up as he accepted it, flipping eagerly through the blank pages. For Daniel, the simple gesture was more than kindness. It was dignity given to his son without strings. That evening, Daniel couldn't shake the thought of Clara. Who was she, really? She carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who wasn't crushed by circumstance, yet she spoke with the ache of someone who had endured her share of storms. As he tucked Ethan in, the boy clutched the sketchbook to his chest. Daddy, she was nice. Do you think we'll see her again? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. I think so, buddy. But even as he said it, a question burned inside him. Why did Clara choose him? Why did she return to a man who had nothing? He didn't know the answer yet. But he would, because Clara was holding back a truth that when revealed would unravel the walls around both their lives. The days that followed unfolded like a quiet miracle. Clara didn't vanish this time. She appeared often, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at the park where Ethan liked to run. Each meeting felt less like coincidence and more like intention. Daniel noticed little things. The way Clara's phone buzzed with constant messages, her quick but composed replies, the subtle authority in her voice when she took certain calls. Yet she never explained. She remained, at least on the surface, just a woman who understood his pain. One afternoon, Clara invited Daniel to meet her in a part of town he rarely entered. Gleaming glass buildings rose into the sky, their reflections stretching across wide streets. Daniel felt out of place, his worn jacket standing in sharp contrast to polished suits and luxury cars. Are you sure this is where you want me? He asked, unease thick in his tone. Clara smiled gently. Trust me. She led him inside a tall building with marble floors and a lobby that smelled faintly of leather and coffee. Daniel tried to ignore the stares of receptionists and professionals as Clara guided him to the elevator. Clara, he muttered nervously. What is this? You'll see, she said, her voice calm, though her eyes flickered with something more, anticipation, maybe even fear. When the elevator doors opened, Daniel stepped into a vast office space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was the kind of place he had only ever glimpsed in movies, polished, modern, humming with quiet power. Employees greeted Clara with deference, their "Good morning, Ms. Hayes," slipping out with instinctive respect. Daniel froze. Ms. Hayes. Clara exhaled softly, watching his realization bloom. I wasn't ready to tell you that night, she admitted. But you deserve the truth. He turned to her, stunned. You run this place? She nodded, her gaze steady. I'm the CEO here. I've worked for years to build this company. But none of that has ever made me less human. None of it erased the nights I spent awake, holding my daughter through storms or the loneliness of carrying everything on my shoulders. Daniel's mouth went dry. For a moment, anger bubbled. So why were you out there that night? Why in the rain, shivering outside a gas station instead of... Because, Clara interrupted gently. I needed to know. I needed to see if there was still kindness in this world. When you live up here, she gestured to the skyline, people tell you what you want to hear. They smile at the title, not the soul. But you... Her voice broke slightly. You saw a stranger, and with nothing to give, you gave anyway. Daniel struggled for words. He looked down at his calloused hands, embarrassed. I don't know what to say. Clara stepped closer. Don't say anything. Just listen. I meant it when I told you I wanted to help. This company always has room for someone who knows the value of hard work, who knows sacrifice. You've lived it. And I believe you can lead people, Daniel. You just need someone to take that first chance on you." Her words landed heavy but not crushing, lifting almost. A door had opened where he thought only walls existed. Still, pride gnawed at him. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," Clara replied firmly. "It's recognition. You've carried more weight than most men in this building ever will. That's strength. That's leadership." He swallowed hard, his throat thick. For so long he had been invisible. To hear someone say he mattered, it shook him. Later that evening, Daniel walked with Clara to her car. For the first time, he saw a different side of her. Not just a CEO, but a mother. A booster seat sat in the back. A backpack with a cartoon character stitched onto the side. "She's 12, right?" Daniel asked. Clara smiled softly. "Yes, Emma. She's my reason for everything. Some nights when she was younger, I'd sit in the office long after hours wondering if I was failing her, wondering if success out here meant losing her in here." She touched her chest. Daniel nodded. "I wonder that every day with Ethan. If my failures will become his." Their eyes met across the car roof. Two single parents from opposite worlds, yet bound by the same fear. Over the next few days, Clara began weaving Daniel into her world cautiously. She introduced him to colleagues as a consultant, easing him into meetings where his natural instincts surprised even himself. Where others saw numbers and charts, Daniel spoke about people, about struggle, about resilience. His perspective silenced rooms not with authority but with authenticity, and Clara watched, quietly proud. One evening after a long day, she walked him to the lobby. "You belong here," she said simply. Daniel shook his head. "I still feel like an imposter." She touched his arm gently. "So do I, every day. But that doesn't mean we aren't where we're meant to be." That night, back in his car, Daniel stared at Ethan sleeping peacefully. For the first time in years, he dared to imagine something more than survival. A home, a future, stability, not just for him, but for his boy. And as he drifted toward sleep, he thought of Clara. Not just the CEO, not just the stranger, but the woman who had seen him when the world had looked away. What Daniel didn't yet realize was that the story wasn't only about what Clara could give him. It was also about what he could give her, because Clara, for all her strength and success, carried a loneliness no title could cure. And slowly, without either of them meaning to, Daniel was becoming the answer to a longing she had hidden even from herself. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel's life slowly began to change. The man who once slept in his car now walked each morning into a building that had once intimidated him, greeted not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. His new position wasn't glamorous at first, managing schedules, coordinating small teams, but it gave him dignity. And dignity, he realized, was worth more than wealth. Ethan thrived too. With stable childcare and a warm apartment arranged through Clara's quiet help, the boy transformed. He laughed louder, slept sounder, and carried his sketchbook everywhere, filling each page with drawings that mirrored his hopeful heart. Sometimes he drew cars, sometimes cities, but most often he drew people holding hands. A father and son, a woman and a girl, a family, Daniel noticed. And each time his chest tightened with a mixture of longing and gratitude. Clara's presence in their lives grew natural, almost inevitable. She visited often, sometimes bringing her daughter Emma, whose sharp wit matched her mother's. At first, Ethan and Emma regarded each other cautiously, two children from different worlds. But soon their laughter filled the air as they shared crayons, stories, and games. One evening, the four of them sat together around a modest kitchen table. Daniel had cooked a simple meal, pasta with whatever he could afford that week. Clara had offered to bring takeout, but he insisted. "This is what I can give," he said firmly. When Ethan cracked a joke that sent Emma into a fit of giggles, Clara and Daniel locked eyes across the table. In that instant, the air carried a truth neither could deny. They weren't just two single parents anymore. They were building something bigger. Clara was still a CEO, still commanding boardrooms and making decisions that rippled across cities. But at night, when she sat in Daniel's small apartment, laughing at Ethan's drawings or listening to Emma read aloud, she felt more grounded than she had in years. Daniel reminded her of what mattered most. Not success, not titles, but love and belonging. And Daniel, for the first time since losing his wife, felt whole. Clara's strength didn't overshadow him. It lifted him. Where once he felt invisible, she made him seen. One cold winter night, after the children had gone to sleep, Daniel and Clara sat on the balcony, wrapped in blankets. The city lights shimmered below, but the world felt quiet, intimate. "I don't understand it," Daniel admitted. "Why me? Out of everyone you could have chosen to help, why me?" Clara's eyes softened. "Because you reminded me of myself. Fighting through storms, refusing to give up for the sake of a child. You saw me that night without knowing who I was. Not a CEO, not someone important. Just the mother broken and tired, and you didn't turn away." Her voice wavered as she added, "No one has looked at me that way in a long time." Daniel reached for her hand, rough and calloused against her smooth skin. "Then maybe we were meant to find each other." The months that followed solidified what their hearts already knew. Love grew not in grand gestures, but in small moments. The way Clara tucked Ethan in at night, the way Daniel repaired Emma's old bicycle, the way laughter came easily when they were together. It wasn't long before Daniel found himself standing nervously with a small ring, his palms sweating as he looked at the woman who had turned his world upside down. "Clara," he began, his voice trembling, "I don't have much to give, but I can promise you this: I'll never stop choosing you, and not just you, but Emma too. I'll love you both with everything I have." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered back, "And I'll love you. And Ethan, with all that I am." The children were the first to cheer when they shared the news. Emma wrapped her arms around Daniel, calling him Dad for the first time, while Ethan clung to Clara, whispering, "I always wanted a mom again." The wedding was simple, held in a small garden with just a few close friends. There were no golden chandeliers or lavish gowns, only sincerity, laughter, and tears. Clara walked down the aisle with Emma by her side, while Ethan stood proudly next to his father. When they exchanged vows, the world seemed to pause. Two broken hearts had found one another, two families had become one, and the weight of their past sorrows gave way to a future of hope. As the story closes, the narrator's voice rises. One rainy night, a single dad opened his car to a stranger. He gave away the little warmth he had, never knowing that kindness would return as love, stability, and family. For in life it is not always riches that heal us, but the people who see us when the world does not. One act of kindness can rewrite a destiny, and one open door can create a home forever. The final image lingers. Daniel and Clara, hand in hand, with Ethan and Emma laughing between them. A family born not of chance but of compassion,